I'm Chris Carter. This is the Locked On Steelers podcast. And on today's Monday episode, I want to talk about whether the Steelers should be trading away first round picks for star talent like Brandon Aiyuk. It's an interesting debate that I think has multiple sides to it. We'll break that down a lot more here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. May never make every moment more, as the playoffs are now done. Sports stop sporting like we want them to, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't with FanDuel, who's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, let's get into it. First of all, hope everyone had a great weekend. Everyone was safe and got to enjoy some time. Let's get into some caller questions that I thought were very interesting. And this first segment, we're actually going to do two kind of side by side, because this Brandon Aiyuk stuff, and this is not another show that's all about Brandon Aiyuk. He's partially part of the question here, but there's been a debate about the side of, there's one side that thinks that you don't trade first round picks unless it's an extreme circumstance. But there's another side that says if you can get star talent that you know is proven, why not use that? Why not get that instead of trying to guess in the draft every year with guys you're not sure of in your first round picks? And I thought this is an interesting debate, because we get a lot of calls on our call-in line. By the way, if you ever want to call into the show to potentially get your question on the show, you can call in at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, your question, and keep your question under. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute. But this was there's been an interesting back and forth, because there's a lot of opinions on this. And I think generally everyone's kind of seen, I'm more of on the side of not trading for Brandon Aiyuk, unless the right price comes around, both in paying him and in what they'd have to give up to the Niners. But I want to turn to two callers who kind of pitted the two different sides against it very well. We'll start with John from Woodstock, who brings up the question about first rounders and value versus a proven commodity like Brandon Aiyuk. Here's John from Woodstock, Georgia.
Hey, Chris. My name's John. I'm from Woodstock, Georgia. I had a question for you that I was hoping that you could break down for me, because I've never really quite understood it. But with how many first-round picks we had that were busts for us as Steeler fans in the last 7 years or so, and knowing that we can give up a first-rounder for a for-sure talent like we did with Fitzpatrick, for example, why wouldn't we jump at the opportunity to give up a first-rounder for someone like Brandon Aiyuk or Deebo Samuels? I never understood taking the first-round pick and gambling with it when we know for a fact that we can give it up to a team that's looking to get rid of for-sure talent. Thank you so much.
So, John, very good question. Thank you for calling in. And I think that's the interesting side of this, is that you're right. The Steelers have had some busts. Now, I don't think they're all busts. I think they've had quite a few really good first-round picks. Some of them are the best defensive player in the NFL right now. But I think that's an interest. It's a good question, because there is depth to it about, Brandon Aiyuk being a proven commodity. A lot of people talk about where he's going to go. He'll be a difference maker where he goes there. So I'll address that in a minute, but I want to present the other side of this, where we have Ralph, who's called into the show before, Ralph from Pittsburgh, and he had the other kind of side of, like, do you really need Brandon Aiyuk? But listen to Ralph ask it.
Big Chris, what's up, man? This is Ralph again from Pittsburgh. Hey, man. So, you know how this Brandon Aiyuk talk is going on and stuff, right? Tell me if you agree. I don't think we should grab him, because I do believe in the receivers that we got now, especially Calvin, man. And this is his year for sure. But my thing why I don't want him is because I don't believe he's worth the money he's asking for. And plus, it's like his attitude. I mean, you know how he is. He already going to come in thinking he's the number one. And that's already GP spot. Like, he got that held down. So I feel like them two will butt heads even if we was to pick up an IU, you know. But I think IU got like a couple more years to produce like he did last year to get the money that he's asked for. But anywho, I believe we should keep that money and just, you know, pay our guys next year, especially our quarterback, because one of them's going to shine, man. Again, love the show, man. Keep up the great job. And I hope to see you at camp again this year. I was there last year. But if I see you at that bar, I'm going to get you a drink, man. Have a good one.
Thank you, Ralph, and I do look forward to seeing you as well as all the Steelers fans who love this show at the Steelers training camp later this summer, which is actually in a few weeks. So that's also crazy that's come around fast. Okay, so let's put these against each other. You have one side that's like, hey, Brandon Aiyuk, he's good, but he's not that good. He's not give up a first-round pick and pay $30 million good. And then you have the other side that's like, but he is good. He did have 1,300 yards receiving last year. He did have 7 touchdowns. Why not bring that in versus waiting for draft help and that might never come because you might have a bust? And let's go over it. First of all, Steelers' recent draft history. They've certainly had so the first round picks. Troy Fautanu, most recent, of course, but we don't know what he's going to be like. We'll see how that goes. First round the year before that, Broderick Jones, still jury's out, but first year returns looking very good. 2 years back, Kenny Pickett, that didn't work. And there's people out there that still think that Kenny Pickett could be the guy. Maybe he ends up being the guy in Philly or somewhere else, but it didn't work in Pittsburgh, so you can call that pick a bust for the Steelers. Najee Harris. There's some people who say Najee Harris is a bust. I'm not one of them. 3 years at 1,000+ yards at a time when they really needed a running back. He doesn't fumble the ball. He's really good. And again, he's been doing that with a bad offensive line, with a bad offensive system and bad quarterback play. I think he's living up to being the 24th overall pick of that draft class. But we'll just make him neutral. We don't want to say he's a bust. We won't say he's a hit. We'll make him neutral. So there, Devin Bush was a bust. Certainly, the injury played a factor there. And Terrell Edmonds wasn't a good first round pick. So you have a slew of picks there, but then you also have other picks that have really worked out for the Steelers, like T.J. Watt at first overall, like Bud Dupree, like Ryan Shazier. And Ryan Shazier, maybe it'd be different if he didn't suffer, if he wasn't paralyzed by like year 5 for him. You also have David DeCastro, Cam Hayward, Marquise Pouncey, going back. And yes, again, the Steelers have their plenty of misses at times, just like every other organization out there. But at the same time, this is also a new administration, for front office, I guess would be the way to say it, with Omar Khan. And I think that front office deserves the chance to kind of build on what they've already been putting together. I mean, let's also look at it. These last 2 draft classes, everyone's felt really confident about them so far. I mean, last year's class had a heck of a rookie season. Broderick Jones was a significant part of why the Steelers became one of the better rushing teams in the NFL in the second half of the season. Joey Porter Jr. showed all the signs of being a future star cornerback with the way that he was able to run with top receivers. Keanu Benton showed a lot of promise at defensive line and looks like he's on the right direction. Darnell Washington looks like a solid depth tight end who can give you really good blocking, and if he can just be throwing a jump ball or two, maybe that's another facet of the game. And even guys like Nick Herbig had a really good season as a guy coming off the bench, and there's still promise for other guys like Corey Trice and Spencer Anderson. So, like, I hear your question there, John, about the validity and the value of first round picks. But I think there's another aspect of this, is that, like, one, Omar Khan's crew, I think, might yield some better first round picks. But there's another aspect of this that goes into the development and to the value of what a Brandon Aiyuk is versus, because you brought up Minkah Fitzpatrick, who they did trade a first round pick for. And I think there's a big difference between how they got Minkah Fitzpatrick and why they traded for Minkah Fitzpatrick and why that was such a rarity for them to do that versus what people want them to do with this Brandon Aiyuk trade. And I want to explain that in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We're going to go over this all in a minute here, because I still think there's a lot of angles to cover here. So we'll be right back right after this. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sports book in America. I love sports, and I love this so much, I never want them to stop. But as the NBA and the NHL have now ended, we get fewer games. But that doesn't mean that there still isn't any action. There's plenty of action out there. And in fact, FanDuel can have you locked in on all that action to have your best plays in Major League Baseball, WNBA, the big fights that are always coming during the summer, and so many more options. All you have to do is open up the app and dream of the bets anytime that you're ready to play. And this summer, FanDuel is actually hooking up all customers, not new customers, but all customers, with a boost or a bonus every single day. day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most of your summer by going to FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Major League Baseball. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here, and I want to dive more into this Brandon Aiyuk question about this. But let's also look at another thing about Brandon Aiyuk, and this is why, in general, why Minkah Fitzpatrick versus the Aiyuk situation, there is such a difference, in my opinion. First of all, when you go back and you look at Minkah Fitzpatrick and you see how when the Steelers traded for him, they didn't, they're trade. If you trade for Aiyuk right now, he's about to head into his 5th season. They need to pay him. When they traded for Minkah Fitzpatrick, he was in his 2nd year in the NFL, and very early into his 2nd year. In fact, he had just played 2 games for the Dolphins when they traded him. So in effect, they really got his 2nd year, his 3rd year, and his 4th year, and his 5th year with his 5th year option, all in his rookie deal. So 4 years of Minkah Fitzpatrick before they had to start paying him top dollar. And I think they ended up paying him top dollar last year anyway in the last year of that. But that's why they traded for him then, because they got control of him. And they projected Minkah Fitzpatrick was going to be the best safety in the NFL, which in my opinion, he is. Last year, he had a rough year because of how they were using him. But I think this year he's going to get back to what he was doing before. And then you'll see him lead the NFL in interceptions again at the safety position, and he'll be first team All-Pro. I still think that he is that guy at the safety position. So you turn around and you look at, well, what about Brandon Aiyuk? Nobody is saying that Brandon Aiyuk's the best at the wide receiver position, and he'd be asking for more than Minkah Fitzpatrick. He's asking for $30 million. And so I'm not even going to go into Ralph's point about the receivers being fine with Allen, because I do think that if in a perfect world where Brandon Aiyuk wouldn't cost you a 1st round pick and wouldn't cost you $30 million against your cap, he would make this receiving room really good right away. There's a lot of question marks right now. I think George Pickens is certainly a talent. I think Calvin Austin has potential. I think Roman Wilson has potential. I think there's options there, but there's no doubt that the room becomes immensely better with him in it. However, getting him there is a bigger challenge than people realize, with not just the money not just the trade value that you're giving up, the money that you have to pay him. That's $30 million. That's right up there with Tyreek Hill, who's making $30 million a year. That's above Devontae Adams. That's above Cooper Kupp. That's above DK Metcalf. You're like right around like where Amon-Ra St. Brown just got a big deal. And here's my thing about this is that you're also getting at 26 years old, which is a good age to get a wide receiver. But here's my thing with this is that if you're not like that level of wide receiver, like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, those type of guys, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, if you're not in that category, I don't think he's in that category yet. And to Ralph's point, he had 1 season, he had 1,300 yards the season before, he did have 1,000, but he hasn't been a superstar wide receiver yet. He's been a very good one. But this is where I think that a lot of teams historically make mistakes, is they pay number 1 money for or super elite money for good to very good talent. And that's where I think the Steelers need to stay out of in the Brandon Aiyuk department. And this is where I think a 1st round pick is a lot different here, because a 1st round pick, yes, you can whiff on a pick, and the Steelers have certainly whiffed on quite a few. But you can also land on a pick, just like they've also landed quite a few. And if you land on that pick, you get 4 to 5 years of them under a rookie deal where you can build the roster, we build them as part of a roster, and they can be part of your culture from start to finish. And then that does so much more. And the best eras of the Steelers, they have a couple free agents scattered here and there, but they're built by a core of players that they've usually brought into the organization either as a rookie or shortly after their rookie season. Whereas Brandon Aiyuk's more of a veteran. And again, if it could work out, if they didn't give up a 1st round pick, great. And he didn't cost $30 million a year, great. But those are not the realities that I believe are available to the Steelers right now. So this is why I'm trying to get to it, John. And I hope that you're understanding where I'm coming from here, is that it is better to develop that talent in-house and to watch it grow every day, to work with it, to cultivate it, And then that way, when it's time to pay them, if you want to pay them, they're yours, and you know what you're getting there. Than to go out and spend on a guy who you're hoping fits in with your culture and you're hoping understands how things work. And I think Mike Tomlin even brought this up years ago when, if you remember, Melvin Ingram, the edge rusher, the outside linebacker that they signed in free agency. And he said he was fine with Alex Highsmith getting starts with over him. And then all of a sudden he wasn't after a few weeks. And he said, trade me because I don't want to be here because I thought I'd be the starter. And, Mike Tomlin after that was like, now you see why we prefer to draft our guys, because we don't have to do with stuff like that. Because we can get, and if they do have to deal with stuff like that, they can see it coming because they're with these guys every day and they can plan around it. And that's where I think the Steelers would be with Brandon Aiyuk. And not that I think that Brandon Aiyuk, if he's getting paid $30 million, he's getting paid $30 million. So he'd love that. But you're overspending at the position. Go back and look at where a lot of the Steelers of yesteryear and how they would leave and then come back. Like, I think perfect examples of this are guys like Antoine Randall and Bryant McFadden. If you look back at Antoine Randall was a very good number 2, number 3 wide receiver for the Steelers, and then got paid number 1 money by Washington, and then was not a number 1 wide receiver. He was let go years later, and then the Steelers brought him back for cheap, and he was part of the 2010 team that almost won the Super Bowl. And then Bryant McFadden, similar situation, really good for the Steelers, left for a little bit, came right back and was effective with them. But again, not as the number 1 guy that you pay all the money to. And that's where I think in free agency, unless you are getting the best of the best, it is not worth to pay best of the best money, which is what Brandon Aiyuk is asking for, which is why I think in this situation, you take the first round picks, and you trust your front office. I really believe last year's draft class was a grand slam of a draft class, at least for how they looked in their rookie season. It could pan out differently in short time or over the next few years, but at least in the first year they looked pretty good. I'm very excited for this draft class because, as you guys know, I study a lot of tape, and when I put together my rankings, all their picks came within like the top 50 as far as their first round pick through, I think it was their 4th round. No, it was all the way up to the 3rd round. So, and they got 4 picks in the first 3 rounds. So that being said, I do think that there's answers to I do think that there are answers to the Steelers' problems in the draft and by keeping those draft picks. But again, it's a rare occurrence. If Brandon Aiyuk was in his 2nd year, and I think this would be a different story. I think that if he was in his 2nd year coming off of a really big season, then I think that would be a different story. But that's where Minkah Fitzpatrick was a very unique situation. That was a Dolphins team that was looking to do a fire sale. He didn't want to be part of sticking around that kind of a culture. So he got, he left really quickly, and the Steelers were a really good fit. And then all of a sudden he's the best safety in football, and he's dominating the secondary. And that's where I think the Steelers, if Brandon Aiyuk was Justin Jefferson, oh yeah, absolutely. This is a whole different conversation. But of course it also would cost a lot more money and cost a lot more picks to get a Justin Jefferson type. But that's why I don't think they should do this Brandon Aiyuk thing. You're not going to get the best receiver in football, but you're going to be paying him top of the line money. You're not going to, and then you're also losing the chance to draft your future guys, your future core that you're trying to put together. For example, like let's say you really like this upcoming wide receiver class. Well, now that 1st round pick that you were going to use on it is gone. Same thing for defensive line or any other positions that are a priority. So all that to say, going back to John's questions and Ralph's questions, I'm on the side of, in this situation, you don't trade for Brandon Aiyuk. You always keep your eyes open, your ears open. You always try to learn what's going on there. But I think Omar Khan has it right to just wait on this, see if the Niners come down their asking price. If he goes to Washington and become a commander, he goes to Washington, become a commander. But I truly think that the answer is more about building for yourself, building through the draft. That's what the winning teams do most of the time. And then having things develop that way. That makes a lot more sense to me, at least. And again, I get wanting to get there. And it also would be different if the Steelers core was different. Like if we already knew, like right now, we don't know if Troy Fautano is going to turn into some great tackle yet. We don't even know, how everything's going to work everywhere, on the team right now. But if this was a team like when the Niners traded a lot of 2nd and 3rd round picks to get Christian McCaffrey, that was a team that had a lot of answers except a superstar dynamic running back. That would be different. If the Steelers were like in the AFC Championship game last year, and they're like, listen, we have to strike while the iron is hot, then I would get that. But right now they're trying to get back to that point and throwing away part of your future investment that you're trying to build towards while trying to strike at the now. I feel like that's doing the most to kind of mess up your own development at that stage. And it's fine to do it when you're at a certain point and you're doing and you have everything else lined up. You just need that one last push at wide receiver. But I think that in this situation, you have a better chance of putting together a whole roster this way and developing the game that way. So I think that's there. We got a couple more questions I want to get to. We'll do so here on the Locked On Steelers podcast right after this. But first, I want to remind you that this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Do you ever get caught up comparing yourself to other people in the lives that you see online and on the internet? You ever feel caught up in social media and think someone else's life just looks so perfect compared to yours? Chances are their lives probably aren't that perfect. But there is a best way to live your life, and that's by focusing on things that you actually want. But how do you block out all that outside noise to actually focus on yourself? Well, that's where therapy can be a great tool to help you get there. And sometimes it just takes a great professional to help you refocus on what matters most. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, go give BetterHelp a try today. BetterHelp knows that life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to also be suitable for your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire. You'll get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any point in time for no additional charge. You can learn to make more time for what makes you happy and figure out the things that matter the most to you by going to BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here today. I want to take a couple more questions here because we've had quite a few piling up, so I'm going to try to work on these throughout the week. But this one comes from Justin, all the way out in Missouri. Justin, take it away.
Hi, Chris. This is Justin Taft from St. James, Missouri. My question was, out of all the wide receivers that are on the roster right now, who are the 5 you think will take to the season?
It's a good question. Thank you for your question, Justin. So, your obvious one, George Pickens, he's coming. Calvin Austin's coming. Roman Wilson's coming. Just because Pickens is the guy. He's the number one. Calvin Austin's the guy they've been developing. And Roman Wilson's a rookie 3rd-round pick. They're not going to just toss him to the side. So that being said, you're really looking at 2 final positions. My 2 favorites to fill here actually could be really interesting for how this gets handled, because Cordell Patterson is technically listed as a running back on the roster right now, but what if Cordell Patterson listed as a wide receiver just to be part of that? But for this experiment, I'll leave out Cordell Patterson. I'll let him be like a kick returner / running back option that the Steelers keep. After Pickens, Austin, and Roman Wilson, I think I would go with Van Jefferson as the 4th guy, because he's been in the NFL quite a bit. He has the experience. He knows what he's getting there. But that 5th option is really tricky because Scotty Miller, I think, could be a really good slot option. I think Quez Watkins is another guy who has shown his speed at different points in time. But if I had to pick one, I think I would go with – it's tough between Quez. So I'm making Van Jefferson my 4th. It's tough to go between Quez Watkins and Scotty Miller, but I think one of those 2 will end up being the 5 in the wide receiver room, because Quez has the speed, Scotty has the routes, and I think that either one could be explosive for the Steelers offense. There you have it, top 5. I'm giving you Pickens, I'm giving you Austin, I'm giving you Wilson, I'm giving you Jefferson, and then I'll go with Quez Watkins for now. I could slide back on it another time. Just when I get to see these guys, that's the bottom line, is that in training camp, we're all trying to learn. We're all trying to see who's going to impress who moving forward. So all that being said, I think that's a decent 5 right there for the Steelers to have at wide receiver. But again, it could get better if they make moves. I want to talk about another guy who'll be catching passes, and that's Pat Freiermuth. Here's Putty from Camden, New Jersey.
Yeah, this is my second one, Chris. I just called. I messed up, but now I have my question. This is Putty from Camden, New Jersey. How successful do you think Pat Freiermuth will be in Arthur Smith's offense, being as though he's going to run a lot of 12 and 13 packages? I think he's going to have a successful season. What do you think?
Thank you, Putty, for your question. I appreciate the question here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Again, 412-223-6644 to get your question on the air. Like we've had 4 guests now today. So let's get into Pat Freiermuth and what Putty's talking about. As far as the breakout, I think his breakout was kind of his rookie season when he had 7 touchdown catches. That was really impressive for a rookie. But since then, you've seen him have 2 touchdowns in each of his 2 other seasons. He caught 63 passes for 732 yards back in 2022, and he caught just 32 passes for 308 yards in 2023. Granted, he did miss significant time with an injury, and he's dealt with injuries. So I think that's certainly a question there with Pat Freiermuth. I think that he could be a major primary piece in the Steelers offense, though. I mean, we've seen him take over games. He can go up and get the ball. He runs a good route. I think if he bulks up and helps more in the run game a little bit too, I think he'll be the perfect complement to, what the Steelers really need at the tight end. I think that him, Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward, they have potential to be really, really special. Also, if you want to talk about position groups, I actually power rank position groups with Brian Batko on our show on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the North Shore Drive podcast, which you can find exactly the same way that you find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Go check that out. But back to Freiermuth. I think that this can be his year. If the offense does work, the offense does flow, this could be his year where he can show off some of that potential, and then he'll be in a really good spot to make strong demands, for his contract negotiation, which will be coming up. So all that being said, I think that Pat Freiermuth, I think he has a lot of potential this year. If Russell Wilson gets him the football, and George Pickens is attracting, defense and everything, I think that could be a chance for Pat Freiermuth to be a person who can be a real difference maker in games instead of just 2 touchdowns. And I think that he can do a lot more. So I think that especially in Arthur Smith's offense, I think he'll be running more routes that hit the right part of the defense. I think that Russell Wilson will also be locked in on where Pat Freiermuth is, and he'll be making strong reads. So all that being said, I think he will flourish a bit more in Arthur Smith's offense versus what Matt Canada had him do. And I think that we're starting to get a little bit closer here, and it's a lot of fun to field some of these questions. So with that being said, thanks for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read I work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, and find this show like you find every one of our shows on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of those daily Monday through Friday episodes. We're back tomorrow with more Pittsburgh Steelers talk right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.